Like, you can't win a nuclear war. Everybody loses, even countries that aren't involved. Then obviously when the second plane hit, everybody knew it was a terrorist attack. You have to find a place to hide, usually in a ditch or a bunker. But sometimes it didn't pick it up till, rocket launch, impact, 2 seconds. The Army, Navy are traditional military organizations. The Air Force is like a corporation, but the Marine Corps is a religion.
So to get us started off, I wanted to get your take on what exactly is the mission of the CIA.
Sure. So the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States came out of what was called the Office of Strategic Services, which was a World War II entity within the military that really did intelligence collection and covert operations, their version of it. When that ended after the end of World War II, the CIA was created in 1947 as essentially the direct descendant of OSS. So the mission didn't change much from OSS to the CIA, but specifically it is to collect intelligence, mostly human-based, right? Because we are a human-based organization, or CIA is. It is to conduct covert operations, because the CIA in the United States is the only government entity that's authorized to conduct what's called covert action, also covert operations, which are deniable operations by the United States government. And they can look a lot like a military operation or a lot like other kind of operations. And then the third, which is basically endemic in any institution, is to protect its own information. So what we call counterintelligence. So to protect our sources and methods and how we collect information or carry out covert action. Those are the three main missions of the CIA. But the CIA doesn't just collect. To go to the first mission, doesn't just collect, they also analyze and produce products that policymakers can get educated on when they make decisions about U.S. foreign policy.
And then what would you say is the difference between FBI and the CIA? Because I see a lot of people get confused with that. Like, what does the CIA do differently to FBI?
Sure, yeah. So the CIA does not have a law enforcement function. We, again, collect intelligence. We do covert action, but that comes from what's called the presidential findings. So if the U.S. president says, I want the CIA to do this, this is their authority, budget, all that stuff, then the CIA has that mission. So it could be, and I don't want to, obviously I'm not allowed to talk about specific covert action missions, but let's talk hypotheticals. If the U.S. wanted to assist a country defend itself from an insurgency or a terrorist group, but obviously that country did not want to acknowledge that it required the U.S., then they could do it under a covert action authority, and CIA officers would then be tasked to help that country without disclosing it, without talking about it. Things like that would be a covert operation, or going after a specific terrorist where we're not going to acknowledge it. We just want to do that and move on. All those come under covert operations, but the FBI is a law enforcement agency. So they enforce the laws of the United States. If somebody did a bank robbery here in Montana and then crossed interstate lines, then the FBI could get involved, right? Because it's a multi-state federal issue then. They also are responsible for counter-espionage, counterintelligence for the United States. So if you think about it, maybe we'll get into this because everybody wants to talk about it, the Chinese surveillance balloon that came right over my state and then traversed the entirety of the United States. So when they're pulling all that material out of the water, it's going to the FBI base at Quantico, Virginia, because they are the primary agency for counterintelligence in the United States. Now, the CIA will have access to it. The military will have access to it. All sorts of other organizations will too. But the FBI is not only the law enforcement agency federally of the United States, it is the counterintelligence entity that is responsible for protecting us against Russian spies or whoever is trying to spy on the United States, China, the big two.
And so then when it comes to things like the Mexican cartel, right? Is it the FBI that deals with the cartel? or CIA, or is it a thing of if it's happening in Mexico or Colombia or something, that's when the CIA gets involved?
So that's a good question. The overseas, the CIA, as long as, like if Mexico has asked the CIA, I'm not saying they did or didn't, but if they did ask hypothetically the CIA to help with their cartel problem, the CIA could help, right? And we have unique capabilities. We have the ability to collect information anywhere in the world, and we have a pretty substantial. Where I came from was the paramilitary part of the CIA, so it's like the special operations segment of the CIA. Its official name is Special Activities Center. If your audience is interested in looking that up, it's acknowledged as an entity in the agency. We do a lot of the action-oriented type of stuff. So the agency could get involved, particularly at the behest of Mexico, the government of Mexico. And the FBI, of course, needs to worry about it because a lot of what they do is try to bring drugs into the United States. So the FBI, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency in the United States, work closely together with the agency to make sure there's a lash up of like how they're bringing in drugs to the United States, whether it's over a land border or a sea border or air or what have you. That has to be a lash up. In the past, pre 9/11, there was not a great lash up between the CIA and the FBI, mostly out of intent. Like they didn't want the CIA and FBI being too intertwined because they didn't want the CIA, quite frankly, to do a lot of operations in the United States. That was not our area. After 9/11, I think everybody figured out that it was not the ideal situation because we missed a lot of things when it came to the terrorists coming to the United States and flying planes and training to fly planes and then flying planes in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. So after that, we changed. We worked much closer together, the CIA and the FBI, which is a good thing because it allows us our counterterrorism efforts to be more substantial.
Do you remember where you were during 9/11? I know you were in the CIA for quite a long time, so where were you? How was it like? And if you could share a little bit more detail on 9/11, about what the process of investigation and etc. It's a very interesting thing to go down.
Sure, yeah, it was. I was actually in the agency at the time, and I was in what they call the farm. Can't get any more details about that, but I'm sure you've probably heard that on movies. It's where we do a lot of our training. So it was a substantial, like a lot of Americans certainly that were adults at the time. Pretty emotional event. We just like everybody, the first plane hit, and there was some concept that it might have just been somehow a mistake, that they got too close or something. But then obviously when the second plane hit, everybody knew it was a terrorist attack. And, we had the leader of our course come out and talk about pretty bluntly how it was an intelligence failure, right? You can't have a terrorist attack that takes down two of the biggest buildings in the world and not have a lot of failure when it comes to intelligence. So he acknowledged that straight to us. Of course, we're students, but we're about to be, officers. And then while he was doing that, he kept banging his fist on the table. And then I just remember this distinctly. He was a big guy, and he pounded it really hard. And when he did, they had CNN behind him on the large screen, almost the size of like if you went to the movie theaters. And when he hit that hard, the first building just collapsed. So it was almost in sync, and you could hear people, getting upset. And that was like my kick in the pants, so to speak, for you're in the CIA and whatever you do or don't do is going to be consequential. And that was my introduction. That was 9/11. My kids were not there. They were in DC area and they were taken out of school. And, everybody got their kids from school, and there was concern that another attack was coming. There's all sorts of things going on in DC that then got confused for an attack. Like, I don't know if that's much published, but when in the United States does the continuity of government, they come and get the senior officers in the government. So like Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, And when they do that, sometimes they mark the zone the helicopter comes in with smoke, which is it's like a smoke grenade, just so they know where to land. It's not a weapon or anything. But after we had the World Trade Center, the strike on the Pentagon, which is right in D.C. really, and of course the plane that went down, thanks to the heroics of the people on board. Then there was smoke on the mall and all this stuff. It was chaos. I mean, you could just watch the history of that to know how chaotic it was. But I don't think it truly captures how chaotic that day was.
When you see all the documentaries, you hear about, everybody that was in the buildings and, how it all happened. So, yeah, I don't think it gives a perspective, but it does look like it was insane. And also looking at that, how was your career in the CIA like, that entire 20-year span? I mean, if there's like any interesting missions that you could speak about, I'm not too sure, but how was it like for you? Because it's like almost everyone's dream to work in the CIA.
Yeah, and I have to say it was really a cool career. I would never change any of it as far as choices to join, and it's a very unique institution. I think it gets sometimes a bad name in the sense that it's a rogue organization that just comes up with its own. It doesn't. It has a chain of command. It works directly for the president through the director of the CIA. It has got oversight by the House, U.S. House of Representative, and the Senate. I say that because you see a lot of movies and it just looks like the CIA is off doing its own thing, but it is tasked and it's in line with the U.S. foreign policy. So um, I think one of the things is people tend to blame the CIA for what it does, but don't. And I'm a former military. I was a former Marine, and I was I was in the Pentagon as a senior official. So I have both military and agency. The military tends not to get blamed for going to war, right? That's a political decision. It's not their idea. Well, that's the same thing with the agency. Like the agency gets told what to do, and then we do it. I mean, we're not a debating society. So I bring that up because I think sometimes people think the agency does what it's tasked to do legally, but it is an incredible organization. It does not have that many people. I think the number is classified, but I think people will be surprised of how few people are in it. So you get more responsibility. So with that, you can have more of an impact, quite frankly, than you could in larger organizations. I can't get into specifics, but I started. I served in Afghanistan for years, right after 9/11, and then again back when we conducted the Bin Laden raid. If you remember that in Nevada, I was at a base. Yep, I was a base chief then. I served in Iraq. I was in the first team that went into the north, and it's called the Nile. It's written about. I don't have to talk about it because you can just Google it and look up what it is. But it was a group that came in early before the war to help work with the Kurdish, what's called the Peshmerga, which is their fighting force. And they ended up being the Northern Front against Saddam's Republican Guard. So I served a lot of time in Iraq, Afghanistan, mostly the conflict areas, right? So, obviously you can just go around the world from Somalia to Yemen to Syria, places like that, and Libya. And I think that's why I ended up being asked to be responsible for Middle East policy in the Pentagon when Secretary Mattis was there, because I was told he was looking for people who weren't political, which I am not, but people who just spent a lot of time in the areas that they'd be responsible for. So.
And then the Bin Laden raid, right? You said you were you said you were the head there, or like in the team, or
No, didn't want to give that impression. I was in Afghanistan when it happened. Right, I was not responsible for the operation. I was what's called the base chief. So I had a bit like you have in CIA lingo, you have a station, which is like the biggest entity in a country, and then if it's a big country like a war zone, you have multiple bases. So I've been a base chief. I've been a chief of station. I was simply there when it happened, so I didn't play a direct role, or neither did my base, but we had an immediate reaction from the Pakistanis attacking most of the bases after. I don't know if that's really that widely published, but they attacked a lot of the bases, U.S. bases, after the raid happened.
And the one you were
Which
at, was it also attacked?
yes, yeah, it was definitely attacked.
How's the experience like when you're in combat with terrorists, or like essentially the target, if I could put it like that?
Oh, sure, yeah, it definitely was the target. Uh, I mean, and my experience wasn't unusual. Just about every paramilitary officer of my generation spent almost all their time in combat zone, in combat, not just on bases, but actively going against the enemy to try to defeat them. I mean, that's what we did. That's what we do. Certainly in the last 20 years, I mean, like you'd expect. I mean, you can train for it, you can be good at it, but any given day, they can pull your number. You know what I mean? So you could be, Achilles. If you think about like the greatest warrior ever, and he died, right? So it's something to be. It's something to be concerned about when you go on a raid. Now they attack bases all the time. Um, that was somewhat nerve wracking in the sense that although it's better, the systems we have that can detect a launch will then tell you a countdown. So sometimes it doesn't detect it until the countdown is um, not very long, right? So it'll say rocket launched, and then it'll start going impact 10 seconds to impact 7 seconds, right? So you have to find a place to hide, usually in a ditch or a bunker. But sometimes it didn't pick it up till rocket launch, impact 2 seconds, 1 second. And then it was, you're just laying down flat, hoping that, it just land on top of you. But I mean, that was definitely not unique to me. That was I think, every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, or CIA officer, or State Department officer, or USAID officer who served in those war zones on those bases. Not everybody went out and had direct combat with the enemy, but certainly the experience of indirect fire coming out of base was very common to a lot of people, and I don't think anybody liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also wanted to touch on spies. I mean, I think that's the thing people know CIA about is the spies, right? So I wanted to ask you, what is the objective for a spy when they're sent out? What is their mission? What are they supposed to do? Is it a thing of, gathering intelligence, or, is it maybe infiltrating the enemy? Like what exactly is a spy's role?
So it is gather intelligence ultimately, and it's gather intelligence in a clandestine manner, right? Because you could technically gather intelligence through open sources, right? You can study everything that's out there, Twitter, media, and you can collect information that could be deemed intelligence, right? Of worthy to a point that it could be distributed to people who need to know. But CIA really, although we do some open source stuff, to your point, to your question, a spy is somebody who does so clandestinely. So it's spot, assess, develop, and recruit people to help provide information to the United States. Um, every nation in the world does it. It might be, up there with one of the oldest professions, because that's what you need to do if you need to defend yourself, right? If you don't know what your potential adversaries are planning, then you can't, prepare for it, right? And so it's every nation in the world has some version of it. I think, the United States is obviously in line with how much we contribute to our own defense. It's very much consistent. So we really have a robust uh, intelligence collection capability.
And then I wanted to touch on your time as a Marine Corps. Is it true that the Marine training is like one of the most brutal in the world? Because I saw like a documentary about it, and it stated that like a lot of people always drop out of the training. It's very few people complete it. So is it actually that brutal? How was it like for you?
So, I mean, that's one of the mottos of the Marine Corps is the few, the proud. And what they mean by that, or I should say, what we mean by that, is that we don't need a lot of people. We just need really good people, men and women. And so it's always been a service that focused more on the individual as a warrior and less on, ships and jets and tanks. And although they have all those things, the Marine Corps really views itself as an elite service in the United States. So its training is an elite service in the United States, and it's one of the most effective fighting forces, I think, in the world. I'm biased, so I don't know any Marine that wouldn't just say what I just said. It's almost compulsory. But, and that's the other thing, Marines are incredibly loyal to the Marine Corps and to each other. Not that other services aren't, but I don't think anybody would say that there isn't any other service that is more loyal to its core, so to speak. In fact, there was I think that individual who said it might have meant it as a derogatory thing, but a former official in the Department of Defense said, the Army and the Navy are traditional military organizations. The Air Force is like a corporation, but the Marine Corps is a religion. And in many ways, that's the way Marines view it. Not really as a religion, but the fervency of the devotion is certainly there. And even the song for the Marine Corps is called the hymn. Which is what you call a song in church. So the Marine Corps, it prides itself on being tough. I wouldn't say brutal, but certainly tough, making it hard, being okay if people don't make it. It's okay, give it a shot. And then I think the special operations side, which the Marine Corps has, MARSOC, and Army Rangers, Green Berets, SEALs, their training is also very, very difficult, and they have the same view of it's not quantity, it's quality. If people don't make the cut, we appreciate them trying, but we're looking for the few.
What type of missions does the Marine Corps take part in? If that makes sense, because you have how the military goes, let's say, in hostile territories as an example. So, what type of missions does the Marine Corps take part in?
Yeah, so the Marine Corps is somewhat unique. Not every country has a Marine Corps because not every country has a really robust Navy. You kind of need you do need a robust Navy to have a Marine Corps, right? So the Marine Corps is under the Department of the Navy. They call one of the other nicknames is Soldiers of the Sea, right? So they're an amphibious army, to be frank. So they're staged on ships. Yet when they hit the ground and take the beachhead, then they turn into an army that's, can fight right alongside the U.S. Army and just be another component of the overall U.S. national security capability. But that's the Marine Corps. I mean, they take part in every war we've been in since, the Revolutionary War. They fight on air, land, and sea, and that is their mission. They come from the sea, and they are specifically also called the 911 Force in Readiness for the United States because it brings a very substantial combat power that can completely sustain itself for a certain amount of time. So all the logistics, all the air, all the infantry, all those components that make a military effective in and of itself are all organic to the Marine Corps. So we have our own air support, whether it's rotary helicopters or fixed wing. We have our own amphibious vehicles. We used to have tanks, don't have any more, but we have armored vehicles, infantry fighting type vehicles, and we can bring a lot to the fight, both from the sea and then when we get to the land, inward, as far as we need to go, which included, just by example, like Baghdad, obviously substantially landlocked. But both the Army and the Marine Corps made the assault, and the Marine Corps and the Army both ended up in Baghdad. So the Marine Corps does both those type of missions.
What would you say was your most interesting mission or memory in the Marine Corps, if you could share that?
So most of my experiences in combat were as a paramilitary officer, right? My experiences in the Marine Corps completely shaped me. And that's not an uncommon thing for Marines to say. I went in as an 18-year-old. I started as enlisted, went to Parris Island. I wasn't a self-centered person probably ever. My parents didn't really let me be, but the way the Marine Corps does it, like you really get a dose of you ain't so special, you know, and you're a Marine, you're part of a team, and that's what matters, not you as some kind of prima donna. The Marine Corps doesn't put up with that. So I don't think I had that, but I certainly do. I certainly felt like I was part of a bigger, more important thing than when I graduated from Paris Island as a private first class. I think I actually made private first class. And just about everything that they teach you in leadership, which I'm also, not to get sidetracked, but I'm also follow Stoicism, the philosophy of it, and it's very common. It's very similar to the way the Marine Corps views the world. So it was very similar in your honor is more important than your wallet, right? Or how much you make or anything like that. Your integrity, uh, honor, courage, and commitment was a Marine Corps motto. The Stoicism cardinal virtues are courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom, right? So they're very similar. So, but it was like reinforcing those. My experiences that I think were most memorable, though, did occur as a paramilitary officer in combat, which for most people is pretty much a life-altering event. So I can share some of those, but I got to be careful with how I share those.
Yeah, so what would you say was the one that you could share, right? Like how is a mission like exactly? Like the debriefing, or getting into combat, like how is it like for, the average person that doesn't understand how exactly, that is executed?
So I'll tell you two. One I think is funny, and one's I guess a life lesson. And neither of them give any secrets away. So one time we were out doing a patrol, and that's just what the military definition of patrol is. You take a tactical element and you travel from one place to another to another. It might be a combat patrol where you're looking for the enemy. It might be a reconnaissance patrol where you're just seeing what's out there. And then there's others like you want to go visit villages and talk to the leaders so they know you're not just this weird entity that drives around with guns and stuff, and make it much more of a relationship rather than something contentious. So we went to the last village that we're going to, and it was getting dark. And generally speaking, you want to be closer to base when it gets completely dark, right? Even though we have the ability to see at night, it's just you get it. It's probably better to be somewhat in safe territory when it's completely dark. So we're trying to leave because we had stayed too long talking to the village elders. And normally we hand out candy. That's what we do as Americans, right? Um, and we were about to just leave because we didn't have time. But I could see the kids they've been waiting. So I was like, no, we're going to give, and this is the last stop, so we're giving it all. So we just stopped and, talked to the little kids and gave them candy and, stuff like that. And then right when we're about to pull off, the kid said, this kid ran up to the window and started banging on the door and said, "Don't go that way." And we're like, "Why?" He goes, you will make it. He said something like that. We're like, "Why?" He said, "The big bombs, big bombs." So we're like, huh. So we said, okay, well, there's not any other way out really, because we don't like going in and out of the same. But I guess they figured out we were going to go that way because we stopped on the top and then we went down and uncovered probably 6 artillery rounds they had placed in the road, which we would have gone over and they would have detonated and it would have, killed a lot of us. So, the point isn't, give candy to kids all the time, but, it's like, don't ever miss the opportunity to make a friend. Not just in combat, right? In life, it's better to have more friends and less enemies. Sometimes that's just good in general, and sometimes you never know. It might be that little kid who just says, "Hey, they're not so bad," So maybe I'm going to go tell them that I think that they've implanted an IED on the way out. So that was something that always stuck with me. I always have candy now. I don't like candy that much, but I have it all the time. So that's the thing. The second one, it's more of a funny, but we were conducting an operation of which once we got inside the large compound, because a compound has like big walls and then there's multiple buildings inside. We had we got in a hoot nanny, if you will, a fight with people we were after. So because they were throwing stuff at us and shooting stuff at us, we had to jump down in this ditch that was right in the middle of it to take shelter, right, or take cover. Once it was over and we were successful, thank goodness, I guess that's when your senses kick back in, and we realized we were standing in what's called a slit trench. Okay, that's where people use the restroom. So we were in a trench that was filled up to here, really, with animal and human stuff, right? So it was bad. It was really bad. It was terrible. And then, so we have to drive back hours in trucks together. So we decided, well, this isn't going to work because it just smells too bad. So we took off all of our uniforms except for like our underwear, because we had to have underwear on, right? But we put all our technical gear back because you're still should get ambushed or something. So on our way back, you can now picture this. Most of us had nothing on but our tidy whities or whatever people preferred for underwear. And then we saw a ranger element get ambushed. So we had to get out and go defend them, help them, get out of their situation. And then when it was all done and we were successful in helping them, these guys were looking at us like, who the hell are you guys? And we got to go, we're the CIA. And of course they're like, of course you are. Who else would be out here running around in their Fruit of the Loom underwear? And then we explained the whole thing, but I'm sure that story lives on in Ranger lore. The time the agency come to help them in their underwear. So I didn't give any secrets away, but I always thought that was kind of funny.
No, it must have been crazy. Imagine, let's say an enemy that survived saw you guys in your underwear and had to explain what happened. And they say they got attacked by guys
Yeah.
in underwear. That would be
Yeah.
such an interesting story.
Those are two. And I got to see a lot of. I got to be in Afghanistan right after the fall, right when I got to come down from the north to see Baghdad topple. And a serious note, and I even at the time I wasn't quite clear why we were going to war in Iraq. Nobody asked me. I was just a junior paramilitary officer. I do think that the battle that happened called Viking Hammer that took out an Al Qaeda affiliated group with a bunch of Al Qaeda guys in northern Iraq before the war was certainly something we should have done. We certainly should have defended the Kurds in the north. But toppling Saddam, I wasn't exactly for that, policy decision. But that's not my point. My point was when we were coming down with the Kurds to liberate Baghdad from the north, we stopped in many villages, and the one that really left a memory on me was an old man and his son and nephew that were flanking him, and he was talking to us, and he knew we were the agency and the U.S. Special Operations community, and he was whispering. And finally, the son was interpreting because he was talking in Arabic, but he was whispering. And finally, the son said something to him, and the father started crying. And so we said, "What did you say?" He goes, "I just told him he didn't have to whisper anymore." And that always stuck with me as, whether I agreed with it or not, there's something about freeing people that are oppressed that ultimately is righteous in and of itself. And the fact that this old man didn't have to whisper anymore and felt that emotional about it always stuck with me as somebody who just happened to be a small part of the group that was liberating his country, but also as an American who takes a lot of us take that kind of stuff for granted. Freedom, the First Amendment right to free speech, free association, to be against your government and they can't do anything about it. I don't mean like violently against, but you can disagree with it, you know. And so it struck me as both, wow, there's something of value in and of itself to, you know, freeing people that are oppressed. And there's something to be said in appreciating what you have. And it's not just Americans that are free. It's your democracy in South Africa, but appreciating what you have because a lot of people do not have that.
That's true. That's true. It is something that a lot of people, oversee the amount of freedom that you have in countries like America, South Africa, Europe, etc. Yeah, what you said is actually such an eye-opening statement there. And touching on the service that you did, you were also the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the U.S. in the Middle East, right? So, like, what is expected of you in that role, when you're doing that job?
Yeah, so I mean, I was not in the policy world for my whole career. I was in the, intelligence special operations world. But when I retired from the agency, my business partner, uh, Eric Ulrich, had 2 more years as a Navy SEAL before he could retire, and then we were going to start our company up here at LOBO Institute. So I had 2 years, right? So I had 2 years before he retired, and then I got asked to be a member of Secretary Mattis's team. He was the retired four-star Marine general, somewhat legendary, not somewhat legendary in his own time. Um, and then he was asked to be the Secretary of Defense. He wasn't, to my mind, a political figure. He was a dedicated national security professional uh, and one of the better leaders of my generation. And so I was told, although I talked to him multiple times as I was working for him, didn't want necessarily people that were just political figures. Right? I wasn't. I'd served in these countries. I've served in the country in a capacity of having to make things happen. So I had the opportunity to go work for him, and then Secretary Esper after Secretary Mattis resigned. And so, what do you do in that position? So there's a group within the State Department, the Pentagon, the White House, and then other organizations like Treasury that make the policy decisions for the United States government. So I represented the DoD for all the countries that I had. I had 15 countries under my purview in the Middle East. So I was the DoD's policy representative for those countries. And then we worked in the interagency, which is called the NSC, the National Security Council. We worked in that interagency to come up with policies that we either decided at my level, or if we needed to, it'd go up to the deputy, or what they call the principals, so like the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, President, the leadership. So it is all about setting policy for the United States. Like, what do we want to do in Syria, for example, or as a country and then as a department. So that's what it was. It was eye-opening to me because I didn't know that much about. I knew the issues, but I didn't know much about the process until I was there. But luckily we had great staff, and I figured it out, or they figured it out for me. Yeah.
And then I thought it was really cool what you guys do with LOBO Institute. So if you don't mind, could you share a little bit more about that, so if the people can just hear a little bit more about, LOBO?
Yeah. So LOBO Institute, the best we describe it as like an association. People are part of it from all over the world, all different backgrounds, but we specifically deal with conflicts, how to end ones that have already started, how to avoid ones that may happen in the future, and then how to help those that are most adversely affected. So we do things like advise the media. We're ABC News analysts. We are in think tanks in Washington, D.C., like the Middle East Institute. We teach colleges and universities. We advised the United Nations on Yemen. We advised the U.S. State Department on Afghanistan. And then we do a lot of humanitarian projects. But that's who we are. And we publish a lot of articles of people who, want to be involved in this area. and from different perspective. We have guys like me and Eric, the Intel special operations type people, but we also have people that work for the United Nations, people who work for NGOs like the White Helmets, people who work for USAID and other charities and just humanitarian organizations. So it's an eclectic group of people who are focused on the areas that I just described. That's what Lobo does, and we take on projects a lot. Sometimes philanthropists come to us because of our unique ability to take people from different backgrounds in a small team and do a project. So that's generally and we do tactical training for the military because we have a lot of military folks, and we do it right up here in Montana. I'd say I'm a bias, but with some of the more high-end training where we really focus on complex real-world scenarios to put units into so that they have a way to test themselves. Should we ever get in a near peer, what we call near peer conflict, that would be against China or Russia. So we really take it up a notch. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I was about to ask you about what's happening in China. I know you've been asked this so much in the last couple of days,
Sure.
but what is your take with exactly why do you think China would be, willing to send out a spy balloon?
So that is a good question, and I don't think anybody really knows the answer. It turns out that China's had this program for we think several years now, and it's been operating over. I think I saw reported 40 countries and 5 different continents. You could say, well, why doesn't China just use its satellites? Well, it does use its satellites. It has over 550 satellites, and so does the United States. So, I mean, this is countries or collect intelligence on each other. That's just a fact. Obviously, I was in the agency, so I'm not opposed to it. But countries also try to prevent other countries from spying on them. It's just part of any national security policy that's worth anything. So it looks like China felt that these balloons gave them an ability to collect information that they couldn't really collect with their satellites. Perhaps because they could stay over, like, for example, in Montana, we have our strategic intercontinental ballistic missile silos. That's our nuclear weapons, our Minuteman IIIs. It looks like that their spy balloon tried to basically post itself over that facility and collect information, both imagery and signals. So it must have the capacity to do that, which may give it an advantage over a satellite. But why they did it with such a large balloon that was so obviously visible even to people on the ground here in Montana, some people would say it was almost like to embarrass the United States. Right before our secretary was going to come visit Beijing, Secretary Blinken. So it certainly wasn't helpful to the relationship, which probably hasn't been this strained since we normalized relationships in 1979, I think. So I don't know why they did it, but they must think that they get some kind of advantage over just satellites alone. And in these last objects, we don't know what they are, and it's baffling, quite frankly, that we still don't really know what they are. But and so we shouldn't jump to conclusions that it is China, because it looks like from the reports that we're steering away from that. But if it was, it would look like China's probing us. But let's wait and find out what these objects are if we can get to them, because it's important that we know just what China and Russia and whatever other country is doing over our airspace. Just like it would be important for them to know what the U.S. was doing over their airspace. Right? They'd shoot down any balloon that we sent over their airspace immediately. So I think and that's exactly what we're going to do from now on.
Yeah. And then coming from someone that has your background, right, with the CIA, the Navy, and of course the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, right? Do you think that the world is always going to be in conflict, or do you foresee a time where there could actually be peace? Because, when you look back in history, it's almost like there's always been conflict. So do you think that, peace is something that could be possible or not?
So yeah, it seems like the history of mankind is just a history of warfare, right? Almost. I mean, it's not totally right. We have philosophy and science and also arts and music and all sorts of good stuff too. But I guess it's completely punctuated by massive conflicts, right? So I would hope that we would not have conflict in perpetuity. It seemed like after World War II, because of the development of nuclear weapons, that we actually, not that I'm like a proponent of nuclear weapons, but it seems like it kept us from having a third world war because the mutually assured destruction concept, like you can't win a nuclear war. Everybody loses, even people, countries that aren't involved. I mean, if you just look up the research on what happens even with a very confined regional nuclear exchange, I mean, it degrades the environment so bad that it would be a cataclysmic to the world population, right? So I we want to avoid that at all costs, I think. But because of whether it's climate change, whether it's population dynamics that are in areas of extreme poverty and not having enough to eat, and then we're going to have even more difficulty as the climate heats up, and you can't grow, what the world needs at the equators. Which I'm not an environmental scientist, but I read a lot, and this is something that is considered to be a significant issue, right? I bring that up because it breeds more conflict when you have fewer resources. Unfortunately, instead of sharing, if you look at our history, oftentimes it's the stronger trying to take what they can. Uh, Again, don't advocate that at all, but I don't see a path to more persistent peace because of the consequences of what I think humans have done to the environment, but also because of the pretty, I want to say extreme, but it is extreme disparity in economies. And then, quite frankly, it's the nature of mankind, unfortunately, that we seem to always find our way back into some form of conflict. And I spent my whole life doing it, so I don't know if I'm a good example, but I do know that that's not the way human and mankind should do in the future. But I don't see it changing, unfortunately. I like to say I'm a pragmatist, not necessarily a pessimist, but a pragmatist. Now, I would say, I know this would be somewhat controversial, but I'd say I'll just go ahead. The more we get, I think, females in positions of power or leadership, the better off we'll be. Not only because they should be represented. The 50% of the world's population, they should be represented at least by 50% in the leadership. But I also think that we would all be better off if we had more female influence in world leadership and policy making.